With his worn-out hat and rural accent, he entered the hangar just to ask a question. But he barely opened his mouth before hearing, "Are you lost, sir?" They laughed, ignored him, and even escorted him to the exit. What nobody knew was that this simple man was about to sign a multi-million-dollar contract. The next day he returned and didn't ask for any information. He simply handed over the papers that made him the new owner of the jet company. Subscribe to our channel now and see how arrogance always loses when it meets the truth. The sun was already punishing John Miller's back when he finished inspecting the last batch of soybeans. That year's harvest promised to break records, the fruit of hard work that had begun more than 3 decades ago when he inherited only a piece of unproductive land in rural Nebraska. At 58, with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands, Old John, as he was known in the region, contemplated with satisfaction the immense green fields that stretched to the horizon. "Boss, there's a call from the bank." Zach, his foreman and longtime friend, approached, handing him a cell phone. John wiped the sweat from his forehead with a dirty handkerchief before answering. The news couldn't be better. The loan for modernizing the fleet of harvesters had been approved, an investment of more than $5 million. "Looks like the year's going to end well, huh, Zach?" he commented, tucking the cell phone into the pocket of his faded plaid shirt. "God willing, we'll hit the goal of 100,000 productive acres sooner than I thought." What few people knew was that John Miller, with his simple appearance and country manner, commanded an agricultural empire valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. His properties spread across 3 states, and his company, Miller Agritech, was one of the country's largest grain exporters. His success, however, had never changed his essence. He continued living on the same farm where he had started, Hope Farm, preferring to invest his profits in business expansion and the local community. While driving his pickup truck along the dirt road that cut through the property, John pondered the meeting he would have the following week in New York. His son Ryan, who had graduated in business administration from NYU, had suggested that the company expand into air transportation for their production. "Dad, logistics is our bottleneck. If we have our own air fleet, we'll save time and money," he had argued with the conviction of someone who mastered numbers and spreadsheets. The idea was ambitious, but made sense. That's why John had scheduled a visit to the elite hangar, owned by Executive AirNav at LaGuardia Airport, to check out executive jets that could be adapted for light cargo transport and quick travel between properties. 3 days later, John arrived in New York. He declined the driver his nephew had offered and took a regular taxi to the airport. He wore the same clothes as always, worn jeans, a plaid shirt, and his inseparable leather boots. In his pocket, just his old cell phone and a wallet filled with premium bank cards that he rarely used. Upon arriving at the hangar, the contrast was evident. The environment exuded luxury. Executives in suits circulated with hurried steps, speaking on phones in English. Impeccably dressed receptionists typed on state-of-the-art computers, and the gleaming jets parked in the inner courtyard seemed to have come out of futuristic movies. "May I help you, sir?" The receptionist's voice contained a poorly disguised tone of puzzlement as she examined John from head to toe. "Good morning, miss. I have a meeting scheduled with Mr. Henry Albuquerque." The young woman consulted the computer with a skeptical expression. "I don't see any appointment with that name. Please check under Miller Agritech." While waiting, John walked to the courtyard, observing with genuine interest an Embraer Phenom 300 jet. He was absorbed in his thoughts when he felt a presence behind him. "Are you lost, sir?" The voice came laden with a tone that mixed mockery and superiority. It was a tall man, approximately 40 years old, wearing an impeccable Italian suit and a watch that probably cost more than a tractor. "Actually, I'm admiring this Phenom 300. Beautiful aircraft," John replied, without being intimidated. "This is our most accessible model, but it still costs a good few million." The man smiled with disdain. "What exactly are you looking for here?" "How much does this model cost?" John asked, ignoring the provocation. The man laughed and looked at 2 other executives who were approaching. "Do you think this is a farmer's market?" The 3 laughed as if sharing an inside joke. John maintained a serene countenance. Decades of difficult negotiations had taught him never to lose his composure. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," interjected one of the receptionists, visibly embarrassed. "You must be in the wrong hangar, sir. This is an exclusive space for registered clients." "Exclusive?" John repeated with a contained smile. "I understand." "I'll call security to escort you to the exit," said the man in the suit, now identified by his badge as Richard Adams, commercial director. "That won't be necessary," John replied, already turning to leave. "I can find my way out alone." While being escorted out of the hangar, John discreetly observed the details of the place. He noticed the discouraged employees, the peeling paint in some less visible corners, the reduced number of aircraft in the courtyard, small signs that his experience as a businessman had taught him to recognize. Back at the hotel, he made a call. "Mark, this is John Miller. I need you to get me everything on Executive AirNav. Financial history for the last 5 years, shareholder composition, debts, lawsuits, everything. And see if you can get a direct contact with Andrew Brooks from Capital Invest. I think I've found an interesting opportunity." That night, while dining alone in the hotel restaurant, John received the first information by email. AirNav was facing a severe crisis, masked by creative accounting and short-term loans. The company had lost 30% of its clientele in the last year and had significant debts with suppliers. John smiled. The humiliation of that day was about to be transformed into a business lesson that no one at Elite Hangar would forget. The next morning, after some strategic calls and a video conference with his legal and financial team, John had a plan. He wasn't motivated by revenge, but by opportunity. AirNav possessed something valuable: operating licenses, an established infrastructure, and a client portfolio that, despite being reduced, was still significant. 3 days later, John returned to Elite Hangar. This time, he wasn't alone. Walking beside him were 2 lawyers from a prestigious New York firm, a renowned accountant, and Andrew Brooks, representative of an international investment fund interested in diversifying its operations in the United States. John wore exactly the same clothes: jeans, plaid shirt, and worn boots. It was a deliberate choice, almost a silent manifesto. When they entered the reception, the silence was immediate. The same receptionist who had attended him days before turned pale upon recognizing him, now accompanied by figures she clearly identified as important. "Good morning," said John with simplicity. "We have a meeting with Mr. Edward Montgomery, president of AirNav." Less than a minute later, they were led to a meeting room on the upper floor, with a view of the aircraft courtyard. The nervousness was palpable among the executives who hurried to receive the unexpected delegation. And when Richard Adams, the same director who had humiliated him, entered the room and recognized John, his face assumed an expression that was worth more than any retribution the countryman could have planned. The meeting was about to begin, and with it, a turn of events that no one in that room, except John, could predict. The silence in the meeting room was almost palpable when Edward Montgomery, president of AirNav, hurriedly entered, adjusting his tie. His eyes quickly scanned those present until they fixed on John with evident confusion. "Gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. I'm Edward Montgomery." He extended his hand hesitantly. "I confess I don't exactly understand the purpose of this meeting." Andrew Brooks from the investment fund took the floor with the confidence of someone accustomed to high-level negotiations. "Mr. Montgomery, we're here representing a consortium interested in acquiring Executive AirNav." Richard Adams, who remained standing near the door, let out a nervous laugh. "Acquisition? There must be some mistake. AirNav is not for sale." John, until then silent, finally spoke. "Every company is for sale at the right price, Mr. Adams, and I believe AirNav needs us more than you imagine." Edward Montgomery frowned, visibly uncomfortable. "What do you mean?" It was then that the accountant on John's team opened his briefcase and spread a series of documents on the table. Financial performance graphs, debt reports, copies of labor, lawsuits, and a detailed analysis of the company's declining market share over the last 3 years. How did you get this information?" stammered Montgomery, turning pale as he recognized internal data that not all shareholders knew. "Mostly public information," replied one of the lawyers, "complemented by market analyses and some testimonies from former employees. The scenario is quite clear." Richard Adams approached the table, examining the documents with growing apprehension. His eyes met John's, who observed him with tranquility. "You," murmured Richard, finally recognizing him, "the man who was here a few days ago, looking at the jets." John smiled slightly. "John Miller, owner of Miller Agritech." "Pleasure to formally meet you, Mr. Adams." The name caused an immediate impact. Edward Montgomery straightened in his chair. "Miller, from Agritech, one of the country's largest grain producers?" "The very same," confirmed Andrew Brooks, "and our main investor in this operation." The meeting continued for 3 hours. The numbers were relentless. AirNav faced a liquidity crisis that it could not sustain for more than 6 months. Important clients had migrated to the competition, and operational costs were out of control. The acquisition proposal, although aggressive in terms, offered an honorable exit for the current shareholders. When they finally took a break, Richard Adams discreetly approached John, who was observing the movement of aircraft through the window. "Mr. Miller, I'd like to apologize for our last encounter. If I had known who you were..." John turned calmly. "And would that have made a difference in your treatment?" Richard hesitated, disarmed by the frankness of the question. "Well, naturally. That's exactly AirNav's problem, Mr. Adams. You've lost sight of what really matters in a business." John pointed to a group of mechanics working on an aircraft in the courtyard. "Those men down there, the pilots, the attendants, they're the heart of this company, not the jets, not the million-dollar contracts, and certainly not the status you all so prize." The negotiation resumed after lunch, with the lawyers refining the terms of the proposal. By the end of the day, a preliminary agreement was established. John and his partners would acquire 80% of AirNav's shares for a value that, although lower than what the company was worth at its peak, still represented a lifeline for the current shareholders. The next morning, John met with his team at the hotel to discuss the next steps. "The situation is worse than we imagined," explained Mark Santana, his financial director who had arrived from Nebraska the night before. "The preliminary audit indicates a significant hole in the cash flow, as well as inflated contracts with maintenance companies." "And the employees?" asked John. "Demotivated and poorly paid for the most part. The most experienced pilots are being courted by the competition, and the ground team works with obsolete equipment." John nodded thoughtfully. "I want a meeting with all employees as soon as the acquisition is formalized. Everyone from the cleaning staff to the pilots." A week later, after signing the contracts and transferring the shares, John entered the EEI AirNav Hangar, now renamed as American Wings, as its new majority owner. The news had already spread, and the mood among employees was one of apprehension and curiosity. In the large hangar hall, more than 200 employees gathered. Many whispered, observing with surprise the simple man who climbed onto the small improvised stage. No suit, no pomp, just the same plaid shirt and worn boots as always. "Good morning, everyone. My name is John Miller, and from today, I am the main shareholder of this company. But I didn't come here to talk about shares or numbers." He paused, looking directly at the employees. "I came to talk about people and the future." For almost an hour, John outlined his vision for the company, a complete transformation in the business model, focusing not just on executive jets for millionaires, but also on transport services for agricultural regions, logistical support for rural producers, and an innovative technical training program for young people from rural areas. "Many of you are wondering if you'll keep your jobs," he said, addressing the elephant in the room. "The answer is yes, but the working methods will change. I don't want a company that exclusively serves the rich. I want a company that connects America, that values work well done regardless of who does it." At the end of the meeting, reactions were mixed. Some employees, especially the older ones accustomed to the old system, seemed skeptical. Others, mainly the technicians and ground crew, showed cautious optimism. One of the receptionists, Lisa Taylor, timidly approached John after the meeting. Mr. Miller, I was here that day when you came and she hesitated, embarrassed. And was treated like an intruder, completed John with an understanding smile. Yes, I wanted to apologize. There's no need, Lisa. I don't hold grudges. What matters is what we do from now on. In the following days, John immersed himself in the company's operations. He discovered even more serious irregularities than he suspected. The financial director, Maurice Gardner, had set up a scheme of false invoices with shell companies, diverting millions over the years. The fleet was poorly maintained, with superficial maintenance to save costs. And worst of all, some pilots flew more hours than permitted by aeronautical legislation, putting passenger safety at risk. In a tense meeting with the remaining directors, John was emphatic. From today, zero tolerance for any irregularity. Maurice Gardner is fired and will be reported to the authorities. All contracts will be reviewed, and aircraft maintenance will be an absolute priority. Richard Adams, who had remained as commercial director during the transition, seemed uncomfortable. Mr. Miller, with all due respect, this market has its particularities. We can't simply change everything overnight. John stared at him firmly. I may not know the aviation market like you do, Mr. Adams, but I know the people market well, and I know that no business thrives by treating its customers and employees poorly. The implementation of changes was immediate and, as expected, met with resistance. Some traditional clients, accustomed to special privileges and questionable agreements, threatened to migrate to the competition. 3 directors resigned, citing incompatibility with the new philosophy. But John didn't back down. He hired a company specialized in aeronautical management to reorganize operations, invested heavily in fleet maintenance and modernization, and implemented a training program for all employees. One of his most surprising decisions was the creation of a new division in the company, Rural Wings, dedicated to connecting agricultural regions distant from major centers. The idea was to adapt smaller jets for landings on unpaved runways, offering quick transport services for producers, agricultural technicians, and urgent supplies. America isn't just New York and Los Angeles, he explained in an interview with a specialized magazine. There's an entire country needing to connect, and aviation can be that link. While the first months of transition unfolded, with daily challenges and small victories, a threat loomed on the horizon. Paul Graves, CEO of the main competitor Amir Aero, did not look favorably on the changes at American Wings, and he was willing to do whatever necessary to eliminate this new threat to his dominance in the executive aviation market. 6 months. After the acquisition, the American Wings hangar no longer looked like the same place. The walls, once decorated with photographs of celebrities next to luxurious jets, now displayed maps of rural America and images of aircraft landing on improvised runways in the heart of the Midwest. The reception, previously an intimidating environment of marble and glass, had been remodeled into a more welcoming space, with noble woods from reforestation and a large interactive model showing all the routes operated by the company. John walked through the hangar, greeting employees by name. He had quickly learned about each sector of the company and made a point of personally knowing each collaborator, from the janitor to the operations chief. John, we have a situation, said Frank Matthews, the new operations director, a young pilot whom John had promoted after recognizing his talent for management. Amir Aero is spreading rumors in the market about our financial health. 3 major clients have already called canceling contracts. John frowned. Paul Graves doesn't waste time, but we're not going to play his game. Call a press conference for tomorrow and prepare a detailed report on our operations over the last few months. Total transparency. While returning to his office, a simple room without the ostentations that marked the previous management, John met Richard Adams, who surprisingly had decided to remain with the company after the change of command. Mr. Miller, may I have a word? Inside the room, Richard seemed nervous, constantly adjusting his tie knot. I need to confess something. Paul Graves approached me 2 weeks ago. He offered double my salary for me to bring internal information from American Wings. Details about clients, routes, expansion strategies. John studied the man before him. Richard had been one of those who had most belittled him at their first meeting. Now he seemed genuinely sorry and conflicted. "And what did you decide, Richard?" "I refused. It wasn't out of loyalty to the company initially. It was out of shame. After how I treated you, I couldn't look in the mirror if I betrayed your trust." John smiled, extending his hand. "That's what I call character, Richard. Thank you for your honesty." The next day, the press conference attracted journalists from publications specializing in aviation and business. The market was curious about the radical changes in the former AirNav, now American Wings. John, wearing a simple dress shirt, his only upgrade in attire since taking over the company, presented surprising numbers. "In 6 months, we've reduced operational costs by 30% without any layoffs. Our fleet has received maximum safety certification, and we've already inaugurated 12 new routes to regions previously not served by executive aviation." A journalist raised his hand. "Mr. Miller, there are rumors that the company is facing liquidity problems. How do you respond to that?" John smiled, making a gesture to Frank, who distributed copies of the company's financial statement. "These numbers respond. Not only are we solid, but we've just closed contracts with 3 agricultural cooperatives for the transportation of technicians and emergency supplies. And today I announce the opening of our Wings of the Future program, which will train young people from rural communities to work in the aeronautical sector." The repercussion was immediate. American Wings shares, which had already been recovering, soared on the stock exchange. Clients who had cancelled contracts after the rumors began to return. And Ama Aero, the main propagator of the negative information, found itself forced to retreat in its defamatory campaign. The following week, a surprise. Paul Graves, CEO of Amir Aero, requested a personal meeting with John. The meeting was scheduled at a neutral restaurant, away from the curious eyes of the market. "I'll get straight to the point, Miller," said Graves, a middle-aged man with the arrogant air of someone who always had privileges. "Your changes are destabilizing the market. This story of democratizing executive aviation, these contracts with cooperatives, it diminishes the perceived value of our service. Executive aviation has always been exclusive, and that's how it should remain." John took a sip of water before responding. "I see things differently, Graves. America is a continental country with precarious ground infrastructure. Aviation shouldn't be a luxury, but a necessity that's met. There's room for everyone, for your clients who seek exclusivity, and for mine, who seek efficiency." "Poetic," Graves said ironically. "But that's not how the market works. I came to propose an elegant solution. I'll buy your stake in American Wings for 50% above market value. You come out ahead, and I'll redirect the company to its original purposes." John laughed, to Graves' surprise. "You know what's the difference between us, Paul. You see companies as pieces on a chessboard. I see them as living organisms, made of people, dreams, and purposes. American Wings is not for sale, not for 50%, not for 500% above market value." Graves narrowed his eyes. "You'll regret this decision, hillbilly. This market has unwritten rules, and you're breaking all of them." "Maybe it's time to write new rules," replied John, standing up. "Have a good day, Mr. Graves." In the following months, American Wings continued its expansion. The Wings of the Future program graduated its first class. 30 young people from rural communities trained as aeronautical maintenance technicians. The Rural Wings Division was already operating in 5 states, connecting producing regions to urban centers with unprecedented agility. But not everything was rosy. Paul Graves fulfilled his veiled threat. He began pressuring suppliers to make it difficult to serve American Wings, offered stratospheric salaries to attract the company's best pilots, and even artificially reduced his prices on routes where they competed directly. On a heavily rainy afternoon, John was in his office analyzing reports when Lisa Taylor, the former receptionist who now coordinated the company's social responsibility program, knocked on the door. "Mr. John, there's someone who really wants to speak with you." She seemed nervous. "It's Megan Graves." John frowned. "Graves? Any relation to Paul Graves? His daughter, and marketing director of Amir Aero. Intrigued, John agreed to receive her. Megan Graves was an elegant woman, in her 30s, with the determined look of someone who wasn't there by chance. "Mr. Miller, thank you for receiving me without prior notice. What I have to say couldn't be scheduled." "I'm listening." "My father is preparing a strike against American Wings. He discovered that the National Development Bank is evaluating financing for the expansion of your fleet. He used his political contacts to block this financing, alleging non-existent irregularities in your operations." John studied the woman before him. "Why are you telling me this, Ms. Graves? You're betraying your own father." Megan sighed. "Because what he's doing is wrong. I grew up hearing him say that business is war, that the important thing is to win at any cost. But in recent months, following what American Wings has been doing, the impact on rural communities, the opportunities for young people who would never have access to this market," she paused. "I realized there's another way, and I want to be part of it." Megan's revelation allowed John to anticipate Paul Graves' maneuvers. With the help of his legal team, he documented all evidence of sabotage and presented it directly to the bank's board, neutralizing the false accusations. The financing was approved, and American Wings could proceed with its expansion plans. Megan Graves, after a painful break with her father, accepted the invitation to lead American Wings' new market development area, bringing with her valuable knowledge about the sector. 1 year after the acquisition, American Wings had become a case study in business schools. The company had not only survived the transition, but had prospered, reinventing ingrained concepts in the American executive aviation market. The culminating point of this trajectory came with the invitation for John to be the main speaker at SONS, the American Executive Aviation Symposium, an event that brought together the main names in the sector. The choice caused controversy, a man from the countryside speaking to the cream of the national aviation industry. The big day arrived. The auditorium was packed with the presence of executives, investors, aeronautical authorities, and of course, Paul Graves, seated in the front row with a challenging expression. John took the stage wearing, for the first time since acquiring the company, a complete outfit: dress pants, a white shirt, and a navy blue blazer, simple but elegant. His boots, however, remained the same, a silent reminder of his origins. "Good afternoon, everyone. A year ago, I entered a hangar to see executive jets and was escorted out for not looking like a potential client." He paused as nervous laughter ran through the audience. "Today, I'm here to share what I've learned on this journey." For 40 minutes, John spoke about his vision for the sector, an aviation that, without giving up quality and comfort, could serve a broader and more diverse America. He presented success cases from rural wings, data on the economic impact in the served regions, and the impressive growth numbers of the company, which had already doubled its revenue. At the end, he opened for questions. A journalist raised his hand. "Mr. Miller, many say that your success is due to your experience in agribusiness, which gave you a different vision. Do you agree?" John reflected for a moment. "In part, but I believe the differentiator was something simpler. I never forgot that airplanes exist to serve people, not the other way around." Another question, this time from a competing executive. "How would you respond to criticisms that you're popularizing a service that should remain exclusive?" I would ask, exclusive for whom? And why? John smiled. "America is too big for us to think small." At the end of the event, while receiving congratulations and partnership proposals, John noticed Paul Graves approaching. The man seemed to have aged years in just a few months. "Impressive, Miller. You did it. You transformed the bankrupt company you bought into a success story, and even took my own daughter in the process." "It was never about beating you, Graves. It was about creating something meaningful." "Nonsense. Business is about winning. It always has been." John shook his head. "Maybe that's the mindset that's changing. By the way, my offer still stands." "What offer?" "For collaboration. There's room for both companies in this market, each with its focus. Think about it." As Graves walked away, thoughtful, John was approached by a group of young recent graduates in aeronautical engineering, eager to meet him and hear more about the Wings of the Future program. That night, in his hotel room, John contemplated the illuminated city through the window. His cell phone rang. It was Zach, his old foreman, calling from Hope Farm. "So, boss, how was it at that symposium thing?" "It was good, Zach. I think they finally understood the message." "And what was the message again?" asked the foreman with his characteristic simplicity. John smiled, recalling the closing of his speech when he was asked about what had changed in his vision after a year at the helm of American Wings. "It wasn't me who changed, Zach. It was the world that finally realized that we know how to dream big too." 2 days later, back at the American Wings hangar, John gathered all employees for a special announcement. The company had just been selected as an exemplary case of management innovation by the country's most important business publication. More than that, the Wings of the Future program would be expanded to 10 states in partnership with educational institutions and the Department of Transportation. Among applause and celebrations, Lisa approached with a sealed envelope. "Just arrived, Mr. John. It's from Amarillo." Inside the envelope, a letter signed by Paul Graves proposing a strategic alliance between the two companies for the development of new sustainable aviation technologies. A first step toward the collaboration that John had suggested. While observing the celebrating employees, John reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the farm in rural Nebraska to the command of one of the most innovative companies in the American aeronautical sector. From worn boots stepping on packed dirt to the same boots walking on the polished asphalt of a hangar that now belonged to him. The countryman who was expelled from a hangar had returned not only as owner but as visionary, and in the process he had transformed not just a company but an entire sector, proving that sometimes the clearest vision of the future comes precisely from those who never let themselves be blinded by the glitter of the present. Dear listeners, we hope that John Miller's story has touched your hearts and shown that true transformation is born from authenticity and vision, not appearances. To continue this journey of inspiring stories, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives about Americans who overcame prejudice and transformed realities. Find this playlist by clicking on the link to the left of the screen. If this story about the countryman who became Lord of the Skies touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Daily, we bring unique American stories that explore the complexities of life, the challenges of prejudice, and the power of determination. What did you think of John's journey? Have you ever faced situations where you were underestimated because of your appearance or origin? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story could be the next to inspire thousands of people. We await you in our next story, always, at 8 p.m. on the American Narratives channel. See you soon.